When I was given the information as to what's going to happen over these next 4 years, I knew that in order to give solutions, that it was going to take some people of prominence, ones who have been in the financial world, have had great experience, and it gives me a real joy and privilege to have with us today Mark Johnson, a man of many years of experience in the financial field who is a conservative and himself knows the issues of what can be done. We welcome Mark Johnson.
Hello, my name is Mark Johnson. I'm a certified financial planner and a friend of Lindsey Williams. I would like to share with you my perspective of how you can negotiate the turmoil that may be coming in the not too distant future. You and your family's best defense is to be informed and prepared. I would like to thank Lindsey Williams for this opportunity to share with you today. Lindsey Williams brings to us a unique perspective on what could be happening in the months and the years to come. His perspective is from the 30,000-foot level. He has talked to the elite of the world, and their view is they operate and think differently than you and I do, at least for me anyway. You see, I was born in a small town in North Dakota, and my perspective of what was going on in the world was based upon the businesses and the community around me. For example, I saw my options were be a wage earner, to be a manager, or a small business owner. My father was a small business owner, so that was the perspective or the role model in which I looked to. I did not have a major corporation in our community that may have changed my perspective of what the business world was like. My only exposure to the major corporations of the world was a small store that they owned in our community that operated there. But see, the corporate office was not in my community. They were not in my hometown. And if you worked for that corporation, you may not have even had a much different perspective than where you worked within that corporation. See, the main workers in my community were wage earners. And they came to work every day and they looked at the clock and they watched to see when their shift was over. And that was their perspective, and they looked at the end of the week when they got paid. And so as soon as they could, they got off work and did the things that they could have enjoyed. The manager, on the other hand, he didn't look at the clock, he looked at the month. He wanted to know how the store did for the month. And his perspective was to make sure that that store produced at that month. And so his perspective was not the clock. In fact, he probably put in many, many hours to reach and attain his goals. And so he just watched the month. Now, if we go to a larger community, and in North Dakota there's not many large communities, but if you go to the next larger community, there was a district manager, and that district manager, his perspective was to oversee maybe several stores, and his job was to look at the quarter. And so he had several stores that he had to oversee, and his evaluation was on a quarterly basis. Now if we go to the next level, we go to Minneapolis, and Minneapolis had regional offices. And they basically looked over maybe 3 states, and they had the process to evaluate stores on a yearly basis and to see how they performed. And then we go to maybe New York, and in New York they looked at national office, and they looked at all the stores within the United States. And as they viewed things, they looked at maybe new ideas for products and services, new ways of advertising, new ways to open up stores. They were not looking just at the year's performance, but they also looked out into the future to see how things were going to go and what they could do to move that company ahead within the United States. Next, let's go to the international office. At the international, there was managers, vice presidents, presidents, and they were all looking internationally for maybe to grow 5 to 10 years in advance. They were dealing with politics, shareholders, governments, and different cultures. Their view from a global perspective, and they got compensated from how all of the whole company did throughout the world. Why do I mention this? Our life stories shape our perspective of the world and how we see things. If my dad had been a corporate executive in New York or internationally, I may have a different perspective on life. My view of the world would have been different. But I grew up in a small town in North Dakota. My ambitions would certainly have been different if my dad had been a corporate executive in a large multi-international company. My business network, my schooling, my education, and my goals would have been certainly adjusted by that framework. And those executives, their views were certainly different, and probably not much different than the elite of the world. The elite think differently, they act differently, and they have a different perspective. They see things from a global perspective. I think that if you understand and depend on the things of where you were, or you see things from where you are, your perspective is going to be on a much lower level. And I'm thankful that Lindsey Williams has broadened all of our perspectives on the way the elite think and act and what is their agenda and how it could affect world events. The things that Lindsey has conveyed to you through his DVDs and radio appearances make perfect sense to some of you, and others may say, I'm not sure that I understand that this could ever happen. Lindsey told me a few years ago that the elite think and plan in a very long term into the future. They do not plan in years but in decades. They are very patient and are willing to wait to make sure their plans are fulfilled. They're able to, with their influence, to affect governments and economies. They can influence legislation and move markets. But they have to move and act within the system. And they can take time to have things do ever so subtly adjust and move their agenda along. Slow but sure. If my thinking would have stayed at that level and my opportunities in that small town would have stayed the same, I probably wouldn't be concerned about the things that Lindsey said, and maybe I wouldn't have even cared. But things have changed, and I do look at things differently now than I used to. I may even have considered Lindsey's talk to be crazy talk, but I don't anymore. So each of us view from a different world perspective, and if you're listening to this tape, you probably view things differently too. And you have a much broader and a better understanding than the average person in the United States. We have been warned. What can we do? The world system in which we operate are very complex. The dynamics involved in governments, economies, and markets have a lot of moving parts. I wish that we could provide you today with 10 easy steps to take to protect you and your family. I cannot. But what we can inform you about is ideas and concepts that will help you think and form a strategy that will preserve and protect you as these world events start to unfold. It is not my intention to offer you specific products or services during my presentation. An appropriate recommendation cannot be made without thorough review of an investor's specific situation and risk tolerances. Even if I did make a specific recommendation, there is a vast audience that is listening to us today, and it may not be appropriate for everybody that is listening. Because we do not want people to act on recommendations that may not be suitable for them today, we will not make specific recommendations. So my comments today will be general in nature and will be information that you can help use to determine your course of action that you may be compelled to take. Once you have made that decision, you should seek legal, tax, and investment counsel and professionals that can help you to determine how you can best implement these strategies in your own situation. To begin with, I'd like to say, no one can predict the future. The future is uncertain. And as a result, the actions that you take today, you will not be sure if what you do is going to work or turn out the way you expect it to. It may not even happen the way that you had planned it to and when you expected it to happen. So my first suggestion for you today as you plan, as you map out your strategy, to be flexible. Be flexible as you prepare to make changes and adjustments along the way, or even prepare to abandon your planned course of action. Every day as we watch the news, we see information about the economy, the markets, and geopolitical events. Adjustments have to be made. And even as Lindsey comes up with new information for us, we may need to make adjustments. As new information is revealed, it may be necessary to adjust our course and move forward. But of course, continue to be flexible. My second suggestion is for you to be diversified. Never put all of your eggs in one basket. Things may not go as you expected, and therefore you do not want to put everything in one particular investment. Some of these investments that you do may have favorable responses and some negative. So if you have everything in one basket, it could be that you got the wrong basket and you could have a negative effect. You may want to consider combining paper assets and physical assets. And always remember, cash is an asset and at times may be the best performing asset. Stay diversified. Third, Manage your risk. Risk can be defined as something happening that was different than what you had anticipated. When you are planning your future, you are guessing at what may happen and if it may happen. And if you're wrong, you do not want to position yourself to have big losses. You want to find ways to position yourself to protect and preserve in the case of unexpected events. In other words, limit your potential for losses. Next, always be looking for opportunities. No matter what is happening, there are places to make money. In good markets and bad markets. In good economies and bad economies. There are opportunities if you know where to look, but you also have to take advantage of the opportunities. How many of us have seen or thought of an idea for a new invention and we never acted on it? And a few years later, all of a sudden, we see the invention that we had thought about and somebody's made a lot of money. So you see, when we see opportunities, we have to act. Lindsey tells me that we have a time frame of possibly 2 to 3 years before we could have a possible collapse in the economy. The elite want or need more debt in place before they bring their agenda to pass. So what can we do in the next 2 to 3 years? I would suggest that you find advisors that understand what is going on. You need to align yourself with advisors that think and understand the same things that you do, the same things that you're concerned with, and they understand what you're concerned about. You want an advisor that study and follow fiscal policy, monetary policy, economics, markets, politics, currencies, taxes, commodities, estate planning, history of what's happened in the past, world events, and of course the plans of the elite. So what is the fiscal policy? Well, when it comes to the economy, how the government raises and spends money is critical. The higher the taxes are, the less spendable income we have. So fiscal policy is very important. I looked recently at the budget in the White House, and next year's revenues are going up, but we still have a deficit. And going forward into the future, the deficit continues. That debt will continue to climb. Monetary policy is the amount of the money supply and interest rate within the economy. Those are very important factors on how we see the economy moving along. The official goal of monetary policy is to have stable prices and low unemployment. It is referred to as either being expansionary or contractionary. Expansionary is where we have more liquidity in the market, we're printing more money, and low interest rates. If we want to contract the economy, we have less money and higher interest rates. And that's how they can move the economy either faster or slower at their moving these two types of expenditures, either contracting or expanding. But this is going to, if they continue to expand the economy, we run into inflation. And inflation is basically caused by when there's more money in the marketplace than there's a demand for it. And when we have an oversupply of something, the value of that falls, and that causes inflation. And currently we have an overabundant supply of money within the system. So the system is inflating and will inflate. And the government likes inflation because it helps them to reduce the deficit without raising taxes and without reducing their spending. When I was in real estate back in the 70s, I loved inflation. Inflation was able to help me make a lot of money in real estate. But the Jimmy Carter administration decided that they didn't like inflation, so they jumped interest rates overnight. And things slowed down very rapidly because as interest rates went up, people could not afford homes. And as they could not afford homes, the prices came down. So we have those types of things to look forward, and so we have to be watching and monitoring those things at all times. Economics. When we look at economics, it's the study of the production, distribution, and consumption of the consumer. And consumers and consumption drive our economy. So it's very important to watch and see if consumers are spending money. And of course, your advisor should understand the different markets in the world, not only the United States market, but there's many markets around the world that we have to watch. And we have to watch not only stock markets, but commodity markets and currency markets. All of those are important, intricate parts of the overall economy of the world. And of course, politics. We have to keep an eye on politics, what's going on there, and understand the behavior, the authority, the power, and the tactics used to formulate and apply policies. I do not believe that the government drives the economy. The government reacts to the economy. And so the government really cannot do anything to make the economy really do well unless they reduce taxes, and that helps our economy to grow. The elite of the world support both parties. It doesn't matter to them who's in business and who's in the operation as long as they move their agenda along with the legislation that they want. Currencies and commodities. In the world today, we now operate on a worldwide basis, and advisors need to know how currencies and commodities affect investments. If companies are operating worldwide and they're bringing their profits back to the United States and there's a currency exchange, it could affect the profits of those companies. And what company today does not operate and use commodities? If jet fuel prices go up, it's going to affect the profitability of a company. So we need to understand currencies and commodities in the investment market. If you do not understand those two functions, you're not going to be able to effectively analyze and look at companies from a profitable perspective. And as we talked earlier, taxes and fiscal policy, taxes are probably going to go up. Right now we're concerned that if we do nothing in Washington, taxes will go up. And that's an opportunity to slow down the economy as they take more money out of spending out of the American taxpayer's pocket. So we're waiting now for the new tax law. If they do nothing, taxes go up. But if they do something, I think taxes are going to go up because of the fact that they need to raise revenue to cover the deficits. The other item that they're looking at is estate taxes. Estate taxes are a tax on the capital of people as they die. You know, it's okay in the income tax to take the eggs, but in the estate tax, they kill the chicken. You can't kill the chicken. You take away productive farms and businesses from people in the estate tax, and they're not able to continue to produce that income. This state tax exemption right now is over $5 million, $5,120,000. If they do nothing, that'll drop to $1 million. That affects a lot of American taxpayers. And that rate of anything over $1 million will be as much as 55%. That will slow the economy. World events also have to be looked at and considered. If there's turmoil in the Middle East, will that affect oil prices? If there's a drought in agriculturally producing countries, will that change the price of commodities? If the terrorists have an attack, will that affect it? All of these things will. Trade agreements, hurricanes, political unrest, to name a few. All of these have to be factored in as we look at economies and marketplaces. And not every event will affect the economy the same. So you have to look and see how each one will make a difference in how you react. And they say history does repeat itself. I've recently been reading some books about 1920s and 30s and the Depression and the things that happened there, and see how that they were trying to guess at monetary policy and guess at fiscal policy. And not only were they not sure of what to do and how to do it, but the personalities of the people involved, the central bankers, and how their personalities interfered or complemented the policies that were put into place. And so we can study history to see maybe what has happened in the past with what the governments have done and central bankers have done to determine kind of how things were going to happen in the future. And also then we have to look at the plans of the elite. Does your advisor understand and know the things that Lindsey Williams have told you? And as these things unfold, we need to maybe start making some transitions. Not necessarily yesterday, but certainly soon and in the future. We have some time to work here, and we need to start transitioning to make sure that we're adequately protected and ready for the things that Lindsey has told us about. And you know, you're not going to hear about this stuff in the media, or economists are not going to necessarily predict what these things are because they're not even looking for it. Did they warn us in 2000 and 2008 about the housing bubble? Did Bernanke warn us about the banks? In 2007, he told us everything was fine. And a few months later, he was coming before Congress asking for a bailout for these banks because they were in so much trouble. They are viewing the economy through certain models that they're used to, models that they've developed over years. And some of the things that we're going to be going into in the future are not going to be what's in their models. There'll be things that they will not understand and will not know how to react to them. You know, the elite can do a lot of things in the marketplace. They can look at naked short selling. They can look at the derivatives market. All of those things can make a difference on what can happen in the future, and a lot of those things can happen overnight, as happened to me in the real estate market when Jimmy Carter overnight raised interest rates, and it happened so quickly. I always tell people that One day my banker was taking me to lunch, the next day he didn't want anything to do with me because things changed. I did nothing different, but the government did, and it will affect all of us as they implement their policies and procedures. But you also have to remember the elite aren't the only ones that are coming against us. We have many other enemies that would like to see the United States fall, and so we have to be always watching and looking for those other types of people. You know, we have the Sharia compliant finances where they have certain laws and regulations, and they can, you know, readjust those things to be able to use it against us. I think right now, the way they've structured, they could bring an economic or a financial jihad against the United States very easily. And so we have to be looking for those things too. And their one thing is to destroy capitalism. And the only way they're going to get their financing in place is to destroy the capitalism and the country of the United States. So we have a lot of things to be looking at and to go forward into the future. And so if you're looking at these things and watching them, you'll be prepared. I can't tell you specifically what to do today, because as these things unfold, you'll know, you'll understand, because you'll be watching for them, you'll be looking for them, and you'll know that you'll need to take action. So my challenge for you today is to be watching and seeing what's going to happen.
It is a privilege to have with me today Mark Johnson. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. It's a privilege for me to be here too, to be able to share some thoughts with you and listen to some of the dialogue that we may have on maybe some solutions for some of these people.
How to be able to survive the next 4 years. You know, after the election, people were bewildered, they were frightened, and how do we deal with people that they have no uncertainty? They wonder what is going to happen next and what could possibly take place in this economy. And as a result, money is frozen. People don't seem to be making investments. The small businesses that I've talked with said, we aren't doing anything until we find out which direction this is going in.
And I think that is very true with the majority of people, but there also are opportunities out there. No matter what's going on, there's always opportunities in the marketplace, and you just got to be able to find those amongst all of the bad news, so to speak, because even the Obama administration, certain industries and companies are going to do well under his administration. So you just have to look for opportunities. So I think that as we move forward, we can't get stagnated and fearful and get gridlocked. I mean, we have to be moving ahead and looking for those opportunities.
Well, Mark, that's your business. You are a licensed financial advisor, and you know where to go to look for those things. And that's what we're trying to do, is to help people understand solutions to the problem. In this particular DVD, we're not dealing with any problems. We're not frightening anyone.
What problems?
What problems? Exactly. We want people to have solutions. And you said something earlier that I thought was outstanding when you gave your personal presentation. And you were talking about you began on the farm, then the small town, then your perspective changed to the city, and then from the city you go on and on up until you finally reach the 30,000 foot level where the elite are. People must have a mindset change. How can we possibly help people develop into that change so they can understand what's going on in such a position that they can protect themselves in light of what's going to happen?
You know, Lindsey, that's an excellent question, and certainly in my own life it took time. I mean, it wasn't something that happened overnight. I think it's something that as I progressed through and as I moved and developed up the strata, I was able then to see and perceive things on a much broader basis and see things that certainly in the small town wasn't even talked about. And then you get up on an international basis, and I've been able to travel internationally, and there's just a whole new different perspective. And I think the key to people is to be able to be open-minded and be willing to change. I mean, we just can't continue to keep doing the same things over and over again, especially with all the changes that you've mentioned and have warned us about. And so we have to be flexible and be able to get out there and look for those opportunities. So I think people, if they're just open And don't discount what you've told them, but really look at it, study it out. They'll find that what you've said, it makes a lot of sense.
Mindset change. People are going to need to think in a different perspective. You know, that's just what happened to me. I've been brought up in a Christian home, wonderful, godly mother and dad, a grandmother that won me to the Lord when I was only 11 years of age, and then went off to college, graduated, and became a pastor for 12 years. All of my life, I had lived in a wonderful Christian protected environment and had never been thrown into the midst of the scene, which I was at later. And then after 12 years of being a pastor, to go on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline amongst the most wicked, cussing, drinking, honorous folks on the face of the earth, and then to sit in the board meetings with the elite and hear them talk about international intrigue, manipulation of currencies, control of nations in Congress and the presidency. You know, if I had not been willing to have a mindset change, I would have never understood what I was seeing, and as a result would never have, for these past 35 years, be able to help people understand how they can protect themselves in light of what the elite are doing.
So what was when you first heard these things, what was your initial response? I mean, was it unbelievable, or this is very believable?
Utterly flabbergasted. I have no way of describing it except to say, one day I'd been with these people all day long, and they had on the front of my hard hat, chaplain. And it seems that the elite, for some reason, it was kind of prestigious for them to be able to say, this is the chaplain of the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. I was like a mascot, if you could describe it that way. And I remember one day I had rubbed shoulders with the International Secretary Treasurer of Exxon. I had been with this person, or maybe that Arab sheik, or someone else that came to the pipeline to see what was going on. And I was at my wit's end. I went back to my dorm room that night. I'll never forget it. I lay down on the bed and I looked up at the ceiling and I literally cried out to God and said, oh God, I can't believe that there are such dastardly people on the face of this earth that would intentionally, by design, in advance, behind closed doors, plan the lives of other people. I guess this was my reaction. But you know, in the next 4 years, with what I have just been advised by my elite friends, everyone in this viewing audience is going to face the identical same circumstance that I faced on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. You're going to be thrown into the midst of a culture change. They're going to be thrown into the midst of a financial negotiation war. You know, the best way, I guess, to describe it is like those old Western scenes where there was the bar and the saloon, and a fight started in the center, and then everybody got into it. Everyone viewing this DVD is going to be thrown into the midst of an all-out fist fight between the elite, a president out of control, a world situation where the American dollar as a reserve currency is being done away with. And so now we come down to you, a licensed financial advisor. Where can these people go? They must find some stable ground somewhere. And that mindset change must take place.
Yes, and I think that's very appropriate, because when we've been raised, not only have we had backgrounds that kind of shaped our lives and how we perceive things, I think the same thing is true when it comes to investments. We have had a certain model, a certain mindset on how things should be. And throughout life, I mean, we've kind of read the magazines, we've read the articles, we've read the books, and they got this theory and that theory, and all of that seems to be very comfortable. But I think, as you said, things are changing.
You listen to the morning stock market report, and you say, oh, I better buy that stock. I better buy this stock. Those days are out, aren't they?
Yes, because it's the market has changed. The types of things that are affecting the market now are a lot different than it was even 10 years ago. The high velocity trading, the lower volumes of trading, the things that are happening within and outside the market, the manipulation that could be going on, is just not the same as it was. And things have already changed or started to change, and that probably will continue.
The 401k. I've heard so much that they're going to do in this administration. They are trying to confiscate every penny they can get their hands on, hook or crook. They've already taken everything out of the Social Security fund, and they've stolen this and stolen that. You can't depend on, okay, where do people go in light of what they're facing in the financial world today? How do they think in order to be able to help them go lead in the right direction? I know that Tom Fowler is going to give specific things that people must do. You and I now are trying to talk in generalities of how can these people help to think in the right direction, look for the right source, even the right financial advisor. How do you possibly find a trustworthy financial advisor today?
Yeah. Well, I think there's plenty of trustworthy advisors out there, but they may not understand the concepts that you've told your viewers. And some of the people that we've had come in and open up accounts with us have basically said their broker just didn't get it. They just didn't understand these concepts that they've understood and heard about in the tapes, and when they mentioned it to their financial advisor, he just basically looked at them kind of strange. And so things are changing for you, people are listening to you, but it's not necessarily changing for the people that they're working with.
So the financial advisors still have the old mindset.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they're going to have to change too.
They're going to have to change. They're going to have to listen to your tapes, Lindsey.
And the individual out there watching this DVD, they likewise are going to have a mindset change.
And they're going to have to be willing to change because they have relationships with their advisors, whether it's their lawyer, their accountant, or their advisor. And if they're not attuned to what things are going on, they're not going to help them or help them respond appropriately because they're going to be looking at doing things the old-fashioned way.
Well, how do we do things the new-fashioned way?
Well, I think the consumer always drives any new product. I mean, you can come out with the best idea in the world, and if nobody wants to buy it, it just doesn't work. And so I think as consumers, we have to, and your viewers are going to have to ask for these things and demand that of the people that they're buying their services from. And so they're going to have to interview those people they work with to determine whether or not they're willing to work with them under these new criteria, you might say, or the events that could happen in the next 3 to 4 years.
Okay, let's say I'm John Q. Public that doesn't have the slightest idea about what I'm doing. And I happen to pick up this wild guy out here, Lindsey Williams, and hear what he's saying on this DVD. And all of a sudden, I see him sitting beside a licensed financial advisor. Now, you say, wait a minute, how do I possibly find someone? What are the parameters that I would use to look for a person who could help me in light of the fact that I definitely realize that we have some changes taking place in this nation?
Well, there's no easy database to go to. Maybe one of the things that I could, a lot of the people that you have in your viewing audience are Christians, and there is a organization called Kingdom Advisors, and you can go onto that Kingdom Advisors site and you can search in your area for somebody that at least we know probably has some integrity and character. I'm not sure they always understand everything that you're talking about, but they certainly are people that you can trust and rely on to get good information and probably care about you as a client. So that's one source.
Mark, thank you for that input. You help us to understand where we could go. And we have Tom Fowler, who is going to approach this from a completely different standpoint. And so we'll get two perspectives. Now, earlier we were talking about something that fascinated me before we began all of this, and that is insurance. When we have a collapse of the dollar, which is inevitable, the national debt's where it is, you gave an illustration that I thought was fabulous about insurance.
Well, most insurance have fixed income portfolios that help allow them to be able to have a return on their investment, and whether it's annuities or life insurance, they're basically with fixed income portfolios. And a lot of these companies have all kinds of durations when it comes to their income portfolio. And I always like to use an illustration that if you have a portfolio that has a very short duration and you have income or interest rates go down, it's not going to affect a short-term portfolio very much. If it goes up, of course, it's going to push down the value of that portfolio, but not near as much. But if you have something with a very long duration, with high interest rates, maybe a 20-year bond or a 30-year, and interest rates go down, you see a significant rise in bond prices, which we've seen in the last last year or so. But if interest rates go up, as you indicated, then of course when they go up, those bond portfolios are going to take a significant drop in value. So unless those portfolios are managed and they start shortening the duration up, there could be significant losses within any types of portfolios that are fixed income with a long duration.
And the one thing that I was told to watch for, of course, well, there were actually three things. I was told to watch for currency wars, then trade wars, and then I was told that the last straw that broke the camel's back will be when interest rates are announced by the Federal Reserve that they're going up. And from what you're saying on these long terms, this is going to create quite a situation here. Interest rates are going up at some point, but it will be the final straw. And at that point, as I've said to people so often, if you wait until they announce that the interest rates are going up, you've lost it.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very true. And even like back in the 70s and early 80s when they jumped interest rates, it happened very quickly. There was no chance for me as a businessman to adjust to the rise in the interest rate. It just happened so fast.
What is going to happen to 401ks? I am hearing some alarming things recently as to the fact that the government would like to latch on to every penny they can find everywhere, no matter what it may be, just like they've done with Social Security.
Mm-hmm. Well, like anything else, I mean, there's always a lot of discussion before activity, and they're certainly talking about it, and we've seen some reports come out, well, actually what their discussions were. But certainly it hasn't been anything that would legislate or change that's going to happen. But as we talked about earlier, is that we have to start rethinking our thinking. You know, we got to start looking ahead at the possibilities of what could happen. And so if people are concerned about their 401k plans, there are opportunities to move money out of a 401k plan. And so, you know, we work with people on that. If they have an interest in moving out of 401ks, we can show them legal ways to move it out. And depending on their circumstances, it may be a situation where there could be no penalties and no income tax. And in other cases, if people are significantly concerned, they may want to take the penalties and pay the income tax just to preserve their 401ks.
Change. My goodness, have we heard this word lately? And you know, that's really just what we're talking about right now. A mindset. I mean, they have forced us into a mindset change whether we want it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, things have changed, and you know, we've got to be prepared for that change. Otherwise, we're going to be, you might say, left behind, because we have to make those adjustments, and we try and do that every day as things unfold. You have to make adjustments and make corrections, and I think, as you said, I think maybe things will maybe start to speed up a little bit at some point. So we've still got a transition time, but I think the first part of that is for us to all change the way we think. And then we have to, once we have that mindset change, to start then taking action. Because if we don't take action, Lindsey, we're just going to be sitting in the same place we are today 6 months from now.
And that could be death to the average person's portfolio.
Yeah, we just don't know. And so it's that constant monitoring, changing, adjusting, and preparing. So, yeah, good thoughts. And I think that's important for all of your listeners to do and view and just kind of watch what's going on out there. And things won't happen necessarily everything overnight. You'll see things start to adjust slowly. And as you see these things happen, if you're watching for them, they'll be ever so subtle. Because as you said, Lindsey, these elite of the world, they act very slowly. They're very intentional and very disciplined. And they don't do anything without thinking it through. And they take their time to get through it. So you'll have some things, and I'm sure you'll be revealing some of those things as the months go on.
I have promised my viewers and those who have followed my DVDs for a number of years that every time the elite tell me something over these next 4 years, I will produce a DVD and tell you what they're going to do. I've made that a promise. There are so many changes, though. Let's look at the Bush administration compared to the Obama administration. Bush cut taxes. Obama raises taxes. Bush protected gun rights. Obama has already signed the UN order in relation to gun rights. Look at the change. But is it good change or is it unconstitutional change? people's mindset definitely has got to be altered somewhat. In many different ways. I look at another change that I'd like to go into. You know, I'm very much of a gold bug. And ever since I was told numbers of years ago what the currency of the elite is, that it's gold and silver, I have taken a stand on it. And lately I've said you need to purchase gold and silver minted by the United States Mint. I think there are 5 states right now that have passed law that gold and silver minted by the United States Mint, legal, lawful, tender currency, that it must be accepted by the grocery store, the hardware store, or the drugstore. And if the dollar, and when, not really if, but when the dollar collapses, that currency can be used in those states as legal tender. So I urge people, you need to have gold and silver minted by the United States Mint. If you live in America, don't go buy a Canadian coin or a Swiss coin or South American coin. Buy a coin minted by the United States of America, and people will have a lot of safety factor there. Any suggestions at all that just come to your mind as to what advice? I mean, people are, right now are so much kind of in a liquid state, wondering which way do we go in all of this. I'm looking at a 4-year down the line as to what I know a number of the agendas over these 4 years. And so I'm looking at a 4-year plan rather than looking at right now with people being perplexed what they need to do in light of things that are taking place.
Sure, and I think that gives us some time to transition. You know, we don't need to all of a sudden make a major change in the way we're doing things. But I think, again, as we talked earlier, if we're working with professionals that understand this, and as these things unfold, we're able to now make adjustments. And I think we have to do that. And so as we move forward, those adjustments will be critical, because just like we talked about a fixed income portfolio, if interest rates are going to go up, you want to start shortening durations as an example. Or you start wanting to reduce your exposure to paper assets as an example. Maybe now in the next few years we got an opportunity, if they're buying a lot of hard asset gold, we can find ways to hedge that gold strategy, you know, because the market's still going up and down, and is there ways to help protect that gold until it does move in an upward direction if it does. So I mean, there's a lot of things we can be doing that are not outside of the box that because we have time. And so I think that, you remember when the Y2K came, Lindsey?
Yes.
And everybody was so fearful that everything, and we had people selling their homes and you know, just getting really scared, and then it didn't happen.
Panic.
Panic, yes. And I think I remember back in the 80s, and Pat Robertson said we're going into this great economic depression. And the 1990s were some of the best stock years out there in the marketplace. And I think now we've got that same thing, that we've got to be prepared and thinking, but it may not be, as you said, we've got some time here. So if we can take advantage of that time and take a look for those opportunities, I think that's what we should do. Yeah.
There were great fortunes made between 1929 and 1933. People who knew what was going to happen, and many people did. And that's the reason I feel so privileged that I have had an opportunity to rub shoulders with some of these people, the elite, and them tell me in advance what's going to happen so that I can help people be prepared for what is going to take place. There is no reason for there to be a loss of everything just because of the way that things are going today.
Sure. And you can make money when the market goes up, and you can make money when the market goes down.
Yes, you're exactly right. And if you know it's coming. So, folks, we're trying our best to help you know just what is. There's one area, Mark, that I guess I'm a little partial to. At my age, all my life, I've taken care of myself physically and tried to live correctly. There's coming a time when every person is going to need to be their own doctor. And I have 2 items here that I hope that people will be introduced to the point of doing something about it. There are really 2 areas in which every person needs to take care of themselves physically as quick as possible. So I'm going to suggest 2 right now. The number 1 killer in the United States of America is cardiovascular. Heart attack, stroke, bypass operations, heart transplants. There is no need for any of that. A person can be guaranteed the rest of their life. Now, this is according to a Nobel Prize winner. And later on in the presentation of how to survive the next 4 years, you will see a DVD, a short DVD on this, in which we show you the facts as to what this, they call it proarginine. It's a substance created within the blood vessel, and if a person will follow the steps that they have suggested here, there is never a reason for a person to ever have a heart attack. No reason for them to ever have stopped up arteries. There's no reason for a person to ever have a stroke. It's all a thing of the past. And using a natural substance. Now, if you take care of 2 items in the human body, you pretty much take care of most everything. Number 1, cardiovascular. That blood pumps all the time. We have 2 lungs, we have 2 ears, we have 2 eyes, we only have 1 heart. And that cardiovascular system must be taken care of. This will do it. And I hope you will learn, number 1, to be your own doctor. Now, this is not a product that I make any money off of. I tell you this because it has worked miracles in my own life. I'm 76 years of age, and I go out there on a regular basis and jog with my 19-year-old son. I'd say that's doing pretty good.
That's very
Daniel
good.
said the other day, he said, "Daddy, this ought to be on Funniest Home Videos." There's a second thing that every person must take care of. You have an immune system. If that immune system is strong enough, it can overcome contact with every known disease. God put it there. And He gave it to us, but we've destroyed it by everything imaginable. We've taken drugs, we've used this, we've done that, we've basically destroyed our bodies and our modern day lifestyle. If that immune system is boosted well enough, this is amazing. You will likewise see something about it. It's called laminine, and it can so boost the body's immune system that you literally can become your own cold and flu doctor. You can be protected by your own body's immune system using a natural substance that comes from an egg of a chicken. It is amazing. Now please, everyone, because of what will be happening in the next 4 years with medical services, these 2 items right here can do great things for you in helping you be your own doctor. And if a person can do that, they can be self-sufficient in that way. Everything that we can possibly suggest to people whereby they can be free of what's going to be taking place in their lives, whether it be monetary, whether it be physical, gold, silver, for certain protections. And I understand that Tom Fowler will be making some very definite, specific investment recommendations. We're staying away from that today because we want to get into generalities as to how to change a person's mind. So any other thoughts you have along that line, I know our audience will help.
Yeah, well, you talk about the medical and taking care of, one of the things that we've started to do is just to save up medical supplies, because that may not be available. So we've been storing up those things that are just common and you think would be just, you just don't think about it until you need it. And so I think it's good for the audience as they look forward into the future. If they're going to have some of those you needed medical supplies, now would be the time to put them aside and to save them, because that's one thing I hadn't thought about. My son really was into that, and he said, "Yeah, Dad, if something happens, if you get a cut or something, who's going to stitch you up?" So you can get kits and medical supplies, even just aspirins and things like that, gauzes and Band-Aids. Those are all things that we just take for granted. But if we're going to have this mindset change, we've got to start thinking outside the box and how we're going to take care of ourselves. And that's the same with the food and water, being able to have that. We talk about gold and silver, but, if things get really bad, I'd rather have food and water, because I know I can keep me going. And so I think those are critical elements too, as well as the investment side. How about your personal health? How are we going to take care of ourselves? The substance we're going to need to get through if, I think you referred to it as, things are going to get a lot worse than we're used to. And if that's the case, where do we live? I mean, are we living in places that may be sustainable or unsustainable? Do we have a plan to move if we need to adjust? Me and my wife a lot of times kid each other about getting 20 acres in a well someplace. And, just being able to have that place where you can grow the vegetables and have the chickens, But those things are all, I think, important. But I think those are things to be thinking about, thinking outside the box again. And so I think those are all things. I always tell people I'm a procrastinating survivalist. I probably don't do as much as I should, and I think we all have to start that transition process if these things, if they don't happen, the food that I bought, I can use it. If the medical supplies I bought, if it doesn't happen, I can use it. So all of these things I think are critical, but a lot of times we just don't think about them as long as we have them. But the day that you don't have them, Lindsey, you're going to wish you had made some provisions for that. I mean, it may be even simple things like cooking, to buy some extra propane tanks. If you're not going to get electricity, do you have generators? Do you have solar panels? Those things. Or if the car doesn't have gas, do you have a bicycle? How are you going to get around? What are some of those alternative ways of doing things? And then, of course, everybody's concerned about protecting their families if they need guns and ammos and things like that. If it's getting, the governments kind of seem like they're looking for ways, as you said, the UN treaty, but also just ways of limiting who can buy and who can hold and registering and all those things. Could be things we'll be talking about in one of the next tapes. So I think all of those things are critical things that aren't necessarily when it comes to investing, but I don't think a lot of people are going to care about the investments. If these things go down, you're going to be more concerned about having a glass of water.
Do you have an extra toothbrush in your house? I think they wear out too. And ladies, have you ever thought about your needs? A lady without certain things prepared all the time, they're in really big trouble.
Yeah.
All of those things have to be considered in the fact that over the next 4 years, we are going to see some catastrophic changes in the world. And people must be prepared financially by being able to knock on the door of a person like you, or Tom Fowler, a Wall Street insider of many years. I'm going to let them knock on my door every time that I hear anything from the elite and tell them exactly what's going to happen next. Normally when you talk about survival, there's only two things that people mention: food and water. They don't consider the fact they need a few extra Band-Aids around the house. And you say a bicycle. What an idea. It'd be nice to be able to ride a bicycle to the grocery store instead of walking.
Yeah.
After all, if you have a horse, he's a hay burner.
Yeah.
And you've got to feed him hay every day. And if you can't get the gasoline at the right price you want to be able to afford to have that hay baler come out and take care of your hay, your horse may have a problem too with the bicycle. You might be able to make it down to that grocery store and back if the grocery store has anything left in it.
Yeah. And Tom Fowler told me the other day he's learning how to become a ham operator. Maybe communications, if you have electricity, to be able to communicate with people around the world. And the other thing I think about is how safe is your safe? If you're going to keep these things in your home, whether it's gold, silver, or medical supplies or whatever, how safe is that safe? I've seen these YouTube commercials where you get these big safes and they get in them within a couple minutes. The doors on them are just hollow and they can get a crowbar and break them. So, evaluate that safe that you're keeping all your stuff in. It may not be that safe. So you want to make sure that that's a good safe. Some of the other things that I've thought about recently, not only the subsistence side of it, but maybe we need to think about what our occupations are going to be. Maybe we need to have a second occupation on where we're going to survive in this new economy, that it may not be that a particular job is going to be available. And so we have to evaluate what we do. Is there another option for us that we can start getting retrained for, or at least be prepared for something else? Those are things that I don't think it's kind of too much of a mindset change to think about those things. But again, if you start preparing and planning, those are things that you can easily transition to and have the opportunity to have an alternative choice for some of these things.
Safe deposit box at the local bank. Wasn't that a an eye-opener for people in the Depression of 1929 through 1933, when a bank officer had to be there to actually go in your safety deposit box with you. And now, of course, I guess they do it all the time. I don't know. I don't have one, wouldn't want one. But people need to consider the fact that that safety deposit box may not be safe anymore.
Yeah. You know, my grandmother, her husband passed away when my mother was 12. And whatever resources they had, she put in the bank. And one day she went to the bank and the bank was closed and her life savings were gone. From that point forward, she never trusted a bank again, because she had that experience, a personal experience. Now, you and I have not had that, at least not myself, but I mean, that's one of those things that we could have happen in the future if all of these banks start to have problems. They already are big problems. You know, we have these quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3, and that isn't because things are good. Those are out because things aren't so good. You know, the government wouldn't, or the Fed wouldn't have to be bringing in these low interest rates and printing this massive amount of money if things were fine.
Very interesting that you would mention the bank. Of course, I was talking about safety deposit boxes, but when I went to the bank the other day, the bank teller, we've known her for quite a number of years. In fact, she used to babysit my children when they were little guys. Mm-hmm. So she said, well, she said, I'm glad to see you doing what you're doing today. She said, you know, my daddy told me one time that he never trusted banks. Mm-hmm. And this is the bank teller. Yeah. Now, if you really think that you can trust the government, if you think you can trust banks, if you think you can trust Homeland Security to take care of you when Frankenstein comes through, or the hurricane like came through New Orleans, if you really think that you can depend on that insurance company to take care of that flood damage, you might need to think twice.
Yeah. You know, in North Dakota, it was always kind of a funny thing, because you'd hear these stories of the farmer walking into the Cadillac dealership in his bib overalls and plaid shirt, and nobody wanted to wait on him because he just didn't look like he had a nickel to his name. And he'd end up buying a Cadillac, and he'd pull out the cash and pay cash for it. And a lot of those guys didn't use the bank anymore because they just didn't trust it. And there, over the years as I was growing up, there was always these stories of these guys would go out and tear down barns. And they'd tear down these barns and they'd find coffee cans of money. And so, you know, because these people, they just didn't put their money in the banks anymore. And so they kept them in coffee cans and jars in the cellar or whatever. And that was their perception. Again, their perception was different than mine is. And I think we'll be seeing maybe some of our perceptions changing. But if we have a bank holiday, open one day and close tomorrow. So it
and it can happen. Mm. It's happened before.
Yeah.
Could happen again. You cannot chalk up a national debt as we have today, and as will continue to be, as they're projected for the next 4 years, that no way in this world it can possibly happen without a repeat of some of history.
Yeah, and if you watch and see the banking, there's basically 5 major banks out there today, and they're not paying much in interest. They're not doing much in lending, and as we noted in that last DVD we did, they're making money on derivatives and high-risk derivatives, doing credit default swaps and things that, if interest rates rose overnight, a lot of those contracts would be in real trouble. And so the federal government knows that, and so they're trying to keep those interest rates low to protect the bank as they're taking massive amounts of risk. But one day that could change. And one of the things you mentioned is that there's a whole lot of countries out there that no longer want our US dollar, and if we can no longer print money to protect the banks, that could change very quickly.
Yeah, in fact, it just happened. I showed you the article just before we began this. Our president went to Southeast Asia, and they laughed at him and basically said, go home. I mean, for all practical purposes, we're going to form our own bank. We're going to form our own currency. We're going to use what we want to use for the sale and trade amongst ourselves. This is going to bring about billions and possibly trillions of American dollars that are floating around in the world now. Okay, when they come back home, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it'll just be no demand. What happens to the price? What happens to the value? It drops. If you look at a dollar bill, it has the word full faith. If you have no faith in it, I mean, I could give you $1 to buy something, and you say, I don't want your dollar. I have no interest in your dollar. And the day that that happens, all of a sudden that becomes worthless paper. And that could happen. You mentioned banks, because in the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and they added South Africa in there, and I believe South Africa is looking at developing a world bank for the BRIC countries. And so again, breaking away from some of the traditional things that have been happening there, so we could see that basket of currency develop also.
But you don't have to have faith in gold and silver. It's tangible.
Yeah.
A farm
Yeah.
is tangible. A paid-for house is tangible.
Yeah.
Let's name some other tangibles. Anything we can possibly think of. In your field, for instance, what is tangible in the financial world that people could safely look to today that could be of help to them? We know the Federal Reserve note is failing. The reserve currency of the world is on its way out. The petrodollar is not being used any longer by many of the oil-producing countries of the world. Where do people find tangibles anymore that they can trust?
Yeah. Well, you know, in our business, it's all about paper. And, you know, again, it's trading paper. And as these things start to unfold, again, we look for opportunities. And, you know, you have to look into, without mentioning a lot of markets and conditions here, but there are many different markets out there, and you have to start looking, and maybe just even currency or even commodities become an alternative for some of these different types. There's alternative investments out there that you have to look at. But I'm also worried about even real estate. I mean, because if interest rates go through the roof, the values are going to drop dramatically. And so, like you say, if you own it, it really doesn't matter what your house is worth, because now it's there for you to live in. And if you go back in history, repeating itself, you go back to the Depression, and many people that owned their homes were able to divide those houses up into apartments and able to rent them out. And they may have 4 or 5 families in a single family home, and allowing boarders or people to come in and stay there. So that allows you some kind of a subsistence there if you have the ability to have a home that you own. So
And that could happen again.
could happen again.
Now, commodities. You strike a note there. What in your business would you classify as a commodity?
Well, I think you got metals, you got oil, you got agricultural products. I mean, those are kind of the main ones, you know, that you look at, and those are kind of the standard ones that people, when they look for commodities, you know, oil, energy, food, you know, metals are the ones that we look at.
Anyone that is without a job, if you want to support your family, if you need to go to a place where you are guaranteed, whether you have any special talents or not, that you can get a job, go to the back of an oil field. North and South Dakota, Montana, they're begging, they're pleading. The stores up there can't find workers. Mm-hmm. Prices are ridiculously high. And for the next, I would estimate, at least this next administration of 4 years, there's not a single person in the world that if they went up there, they couldn't get a job. I was just this summer with some people who had gone to that oil field up in North and South Dakota and Montana, and they said, Chaplain, you tell anybody and everybody if they need a job, they need money for their family, all they have to do is come up here. Mm-hmm. He said, there's always jobs, and at much higher wages than what they'll make in the lower 48. There's no reason for a person not to be able to support their family today with the oil-rich, what should we say? It's an oil, you know, they call it black gold.
Sure.
And there's a gold rush going on up there right now.
Yeah. One of the problems up there, of course, has been people that have gone up there has been housing. You know, it's been very difficult to find housing, and you can't survive a North Dakota winter in a tent or a camper on that kind of weather. And so that's been one of the issues out there. But you mentioned like one of the large stores there basically has a hard time hiring people at even $20 an hour when they can go out in the oil field and make $100,000 a year. But as you look at that, it's kind of almost like concentric rings going out, and it's gone out from Williston to Dickinson to Bismarck and even some of the smaller communities. There's people that live in Fargo that are commuting up to the oil fields working 3 days, off 3 days, or 4 days on, 3 days off. And so they've had to, you know, adapt. But like you say, there's jobs. It's the housing is the big problem up there. And it's probably not a place, and you've been on the oil fields, that you probably don't want to bring your family up there.
Not have them rub shoulders with the roughnecks and the drillers, that's for sure. But there is work there. Look for the opportunities.
Exactly.
And right now, if you need a job, go to North and South Dakota and Montana. I don't care whether it's summer or winter.
Yeah.
Summers up there are wonderful. The
So-
winter's another story. You lived up there. You were born up there.
I was born up there. I got family. In fact, I got a brother-in-law living in Williston, and he sees what's going on. So we get kind of an update now and then. But I also have some property in another state, and I won't mention it this time, but I've been renting some property to first a geologist, and now I've got a land lease guy living in my house down there, and they tell me that if this continues, that there's even going to be maybe another one as big as the Bakken oil in this other state. But I won't say anything about that quite yet. But
Well, I can. I can say something about it.
Okay.
I've already been told. In fact, my elite friend sent me an email just recently. And basically he said, sit down and hold on to your chair. He said, this is going to be hard to... If it had not come from him, I wouldn't believe it. He showed under Denver, Colorado, and a place over in Utah. And then there's a Bakken field up there in North and South Dakota and Montana. And then back years ago, before my very close friend, elite friend, who was in his 80s, before he passed away, he showed me all of the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And Prudhoe Bay is a drop in the bucket compared to what's in the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And all of these areas are future opportunities and potentials, and let people be open to them. Okay, let's get some more potentials here. Let's just get some line items that we can talk about. Now, we've talked about oil. If you want a job, go to North and South Dakota and Montana. If you want to invest in gold and silver, we know where it's gone. When this last administration began, gold was $800 an ounce. Today it's $1,750 an ounce within a 4-year period. Now let's talk about every opportunity we can think of that possibly people could look to at this point.
I got to go back and ask a question before we do that. Is there any indication of where the oil prices are going? I know a while back you had some thoughts on that. Is there anything that they've told you about direction of oil prices at this time, or is it just kind of being kept low?
All the elite are waiting on is Assad in Syria. He has put a kink in their plans for months. And once that country is taken over and given to the Muslim Brotherhood, mark my words, to the Muslim Brotherhood, then oil prices are going to go up. So in light of that, what are the opportunities?
Well, you know, again, not wanting to make any specific recommendations, anything, but if gold and oil are going up, there's an opportunity in terms of the investment side of it.
Well, I'll never forget a man that contacted me. You remember back about three and a half years ago when my elite friend called me on the phone and he said, Chaplain, do you want the world to think you're a prophet? Yeah. I said, what do you mean? He said, tell it every place that you know. He said, tell them the price of crude oil is going from $147 a barrel, where it was right then, to $50 a barrel. And later, after it happened, 3 months later, exactly like he told me. Of course, everybody thought I was a prophet, but I'm not. Just an ordinary, everyday guy, you know, that puts on my breeches every morning. But they thought I was a prophet. But anyway, I'm not. And so later on, a man called me that played the futures market. And he said, I took what you said at face value, and he said, I want to thank you for making me over $100,000 in the futures market. So now I'm telling you what the elite have told me that they are going to do for the next 4 years. Mark has tried every way possible as a person in the finance field to suggest to you every mindset, every thought pattern, every way that could possibly be helped to you. We've done everything we possibly can. Then Tom Fowler is going to come along and help you with some very specific ideas. We've talked about the health care and what you can do for yourself. Well, now it's all up to you.
Cardiovascular disease is the #1 cause of death in America. In 2001, over 900,000 people died from this silent killer. That number is more than all the American soldiers killed in battle during all the American wars combined. An aggregate 44 years of fighting over the course of more than 2 centuries has resulted in 653,406 combat deaths. Think of it. More Americans die in 1 year from cardiovascular disease than died in actual combat from all the wars we have ever fought. The Nobel Prize in Medicine for 1998 was awarded to 3 American scientists for their discoveries concerning nitric oxide as a signaling molecule in the cardiovascular system. So what does that mean? The medical benefits of these discoveries can be summed up in 4 words. No more cardiovascular disease. And this without drugs or surgery. Dr. John P. Cook, MD, PhD, is head of Stanford Medical School's vascular unit. He wrote a book based on this Nobel Prize-winning science called The Cardiovascular Cure. This title alone speaks volumes. Seldom, if ever, do we hear the word cure coming out of the pharmaceutical industry. Treating the symptoms of a disease is far more profitable than finding a cure. On the back cover of this book we read, in 1998, the Nobel Prize was awarded to scientists for the discovery of a chemical produced in the lining of the blood vessels that keeps them free of plaque. Do you think the pharmaceutical industry wants you to know that there is a chemical produced in the lining of your blood vessels that keeps them free of plaque? Of course not. It's all about the money. Cardiovascular disease is big business for the pharmaceutical industry. In 2007, statin drugs alone generated $34 billion in revenue to the drug companies. And according to the Journal of the American Medical Association, adverse drug reactions in the United States cause 1.5 million hospitalizations and 100,000 deaths, making it the 4th leading cause of death in the country. Twice as many people will die each year from adverse drug reactions than are killed from automobile crashes. To put it into perspective, it would be like a Boeing 767 fully loaded with passengers crashing every day of the year with no survivors. Do you think that would make the evening news? The amino acid L-arginine is the source the endothelium uses to create nitric oxide. L-arginine is a nitric oxide producer and high-potency antioxidant that has power to reverse the buildup of cholesterol in the arteries. The scientific evidence of the benefits of L-arginine and nitric oxide are extensive. The research at Stanford, Harvard, University of South Carolina, National Cancer Institute, National Institute of Health, as well as most cardiovascular centers throughout the world, all point to L-arginine and nitric oxide as perhaps the most important discovery ever in preventing heart disease. In addition to the overwhelming scientific proof, the clinical evidence is equally impressive. Meet Dr. Joe Prendergast. Dr. Joe, as he likes to be called, is board certified in internal medicine as well as endocrinology and metabolism. On June 4, 2008, the American Diabetes Association named Dr. Joseph Prendergast Father of the Year for 2008. At the awards dinner honoring him, Dr. Joe's wife tells the following story. 2 years ago, a letter was sent out by the hospital stating that Dr. Prendergast was no longer on the staff because he was dead. This letter proved to be an embarrassment to the hospital, as Dr. Joe was alive and well. The hospital wrongfully assumed that Dr. Joe had died because he had not admitted a single patient to the hospital in 16 years. In 1991, Dr. Joe introduced L-arginine into his medical practice. As an endocrinologist, 80% of his patients have diabetes. According to the American Diabetes Association, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes will die from heart disease and/or stroke. Prior to 1991 and the introduction of L-arginine to his practice, Dr. Joe wrote that 30% of his diabetic patients ended up seeing a cardiologist for bypass procedures. Now, 18 years and 5,000 patients later, Dr. Joe has not lost one patient to a heart attack or stroke, nor has he admitted anyone to a hospital. In addition, prior to 1991, Dr. Joe's practice kept 3 cardiologists in business with his referrals. After Dr. Joe introduced L-arginine to his patients, the referrals all ended. All 3 cardiologists went out of business and had to move to new areas to practice cardiology. In his book, Dr. Joe writes, "One of my friends and colleagues is a well-respected cardiologist. I used to refer a lot of patients to him. Recently he said to me, 'Did I do something to offend you? I've noticed that you no longer send patients to me.' I said, 'It's not you. I am not sending my patients to anyone. They don't need cardiologists because we are reversing their heart disease.'" Finally, not too many of us enjoy growing old. L-arginine is the basic element that represents the best single product to take for anti-aging treatment. L-arginine is the source to nitric oxide, and nitric oxide is 1,000 times more powerful than any other natural antioxidant in the body. Antioxidants neutralize free radicals. So what do free radicals do? You just
For there is no need for a person to go out in eternity not knowing that they have eternal life. The Bible says in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 through 9, "For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." Isn't it wonderful that we don't have to depend on something, some work, some person, some church in order to get us eternal life? Now notice the plan there. For by grace. Grace is something that you get free of charge. And it says, "For by grace are you saved." A person's soul can be saved from sin and can know fellowship with God through eternity. For by grace are you saved through faith. Well, where do you get faith from? There again, the Bible has the answer when it says, "Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God." Please go to the book of Romans in the New Testament of the Bible and read the entire book. You'll find there what is necessary for you to know Christ as your Savior. For he said, There is no other name under heaven given amongst men whereby ye must be saved. Don't try anything else. Don't trust anything else. He paid the price for our sin, and only that price will God the Father accept for our eternal salvation. So faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the Word of God. As you read the Bible says you automatically get faith. And then you will have the faith to believe the grace that God has already provided for you. And when that grace is applied to you because you have repented of your sins and placed your faith in God's way of salvation, you can have eternal life. I'm sure you've heard it. It's a verse that most everybody at one time or another has heard in church or wherever it may be. John chapter 3, verse 16, For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. May I beg you right now that you'll bow your head, and you may wish in front of that TV set to get on your knees and just say, Our Father, I believe your word. I believe that I'm a sinner. I need to be saved, and I'm accepting your Son for my salvation. Amen. Lord bless you. For the gift of God is eternal life to all of those who will believe. Now, if you have further questions, please go to lindseywilliams.net. There you will find an extensive salvation message, an explanation, and other things that hopefully will be a great help to you. Lord bless.